apocalyptic explorer, and tonight we will continue our reading in. I'm not sure if you can see that. There we go. Ruin and Rising by Leigh. There we go. By Leigh Bardugo. This is the third book in the trilogy titled Shadow and Bone, and as you can see, there was a Netflix series called Shadow and Bone, which was based off the first two seasons of. Sorry. First two books of the Shadow and Bone trilogy, as well as the Six of Crows duology. So, I know it's been quite a while since I've gotten into this book. There's been, as I've said in my previous video, life's been pretty busy, and it just gets really crazy. So we are back, and I hope you all enjoy this video as we continue to finish the Shadow and Bone trilogy. Chapter 12. We bobbed and faltered, the little craft swinging precariously back and forth beneath the sails as Tamar and the crew tried to get control of the bittern. Snow lashed at our faces, stinging gusts, and when the hull nicked the side of the cliff, the whole deck tilted, sending us all scrambling for purchase. We had no tide makers to keep us cloaked in mist, so we could only hope that Bagra had bought us enough time to get clear of the mountains and the dark one. Bagra. My eyes skittered over the deck. Misha had tucked himself against the side of the hull, his arms curled over his head. No one could stop to offer comfort. I knelt beside Adric and Genya. Inishovia had taken a massive bite from Adric's shoulder, and Genya was trying to stop the bleeding. But she'd never been trained as a healer. His lips were pale, his skin ice cold, and as I watched, his eyes began to roll back in his head. Tolia! Tolia! I shouted, trying not to sound panicked. Nadia turned, her eyes wide with terror, and the bittern dipped. Keep us steady, Nadia, Tamar demanded over the rush of the wind. Tolia, help him! Harshaw came up behind Tolia. He had a deep gash in his forearm, but he gripped the ropes and said, "Ready." I could see Onket's shape squirming around in his coat. Tolia's brow was furrowed. Stig was meant to be with us. Harshaw hadn't been trained to work with the lines. Just hold her steady, he cautioned Harshaw. He looked to where Maul stood, braced on the opposite side of the hole, hands tight to the ropes, muscles straining as we were buffeted by snow and wind. Do it, Maul shouted. He was bleeding from the bullet wound in his thigh. They made the switch. The bittern tilted, then righted itself as Harshaw let out a grunt. Got it! He grated through clenched teeth. It wasn't reassuring. Toya leapt down to Adric's side and began working. Nadia was sobbing, but she held the draft steady. Can you save the arm? I asked quietly. Toya shook his head once. He was a heartrender, a warrior, and a killer, not a healer. I can't just seal the skin, he said. We'll bleed him internally. I need to close the arteries. Can you warm him? I cast light over Adric, and his trembling calmed slightly. We drove onward, sails taut with the force of Grisha wind. Tamar bent to the wheel, coat billowing behind her. I knew when we'd cleared the mountains because the bittern ceased its shaking. The air cut cold against my cheeks as we picked up speed, but I kept Adric cocooned in the sunlight. Time seemed to slow. Neither of them wanted to stay it, but I could see Nadia and Zoya beginning to tire. Maul and Harsha couldn't be faring well either. We You need to sit down, I said. Where are we? Harshaw asked. His crest of red hair lay flat on his head, soaked through with snow. I thought of him as unpredictable, maybe a little dangerous. But here he was, bloody, tired, and working the lines for hours without complaint. Tamar consulted her charts. Just past the permafrost. If we keep heading south, we'll be above more populated areas soon. We could try to find woods for cover, panted Nadia. We're too near Chernast, Paul said. Harshaw adjusted his grip. Does it matter if we fly through the day? We're going to be spotted. We could go higher, suggested Genya. Nadia shook her head. We can try, but the air's thinner up there, and we'll use a lot of power on a vertical move. Where are we headed anyway? Asked Zoya. Without thinking twice, I said, to the copper mine at Murin, to the Firebird. There was a brief silence. Then Harshaw said what I knew a lot of them had to be thinking. We could run. Every time we face those monsters, more of us die. We could take this ship anywhere. Kirch, Novi Zem. Oh no, muttered Maul. This is my home, said Zoya. I won't be chased out of it. What about Adric? Nadia asked, her voice hoarse. He lost a lot of blood, said Tolia. All I can do is keep his heart steady to try to give him time to recover. He needs a real healer. If the Darkling finds us, a healer won't do him any good, said Zoya. I ran a hand over my eyes, trying to think. Adric might be stable, or I might slip more deeply into a coma and never come out of it. And if we sat down somewhere and were spotted, we'd all be in for death or worse. The Darkling must know we wouldn't land in Ferda. Deep in enemy territory. He might think we'd flee to West Ravka. He'd send scouts everywhere he could. Would he stop to get grief for his mother? Dashed on the rocks? Would there be enough of her left to bury? I looked over my shoulder. Sure that at any minute I'd see Nishovia swooping down on us. I couldn't think about Nikolai. I wouldn't. We go to Murin, I said. We'll figure out the rest from there. I won't force anyone to stay. Zoya? Nadia? Can you get us there? They'd been flagging before, but I needed to believe they had some reserve of strength to call on. I know I can, Zoya replied. Nadia's earnest chin lifted. Try to keep up. We can still be seen, I said. We need a tide maker. David glanced up at the bandaging the powder burns on his hand. What if you tried bending the light? I frowned. Bend it how? The only reason anyone can see the ship is because light is bouncing off it. Just eliminate the reflection. I'm not sure I follow. You don't say, said Genya. Like a rock in a stream, David explained. Just bend the light so it never actually hits the ship. There's nothing to see. So we could be invisible? Genya asked. Theoretically. She yanked off her boot and plucked it down on the deck. Try it. I eyed the boot skeptically. I wasn't sure how to begin. This was a completely different way of using my power. Just bend the light? Well, said David, it might help to remember that you don't have to concern yourself with the refractive index. You just need to redirect and synchronize both components of light simultaneously. I mean, you can't just start with the magnetic. That would be ridiculous. I held up my hand. Let's stick with the rock in the stream. I concentrated, but I didn't summon up or hone the light the way I did with the cut. Instead, I just tried to give it a nudge. The toe of the boot grew blurry, as the air near it seemed to waver. I tried to think of the light as water, as wind rushing around the leather, parting then slipping back together, as if the boot had never been there. I cupped my fingers. The boot flickered and vanished. Genya whooped. I shrieked and threw my hands in the air. The boot reappeared. I curled my fingers, and it was gone. David, have I ever told you you're a genius? Yes, I'm telling you again. Because the ship was larger and in motion, keeping the curve of light around it was more of a challenge. But I only had to worry about the light reflecting off the bottom of the hole, and after a few tries, I felt comfortable keeping the bend steady. If anyone happened to be standing in a field, peering straight up, they might see something off, a blur or a flash of light, but they wouldn't see a winged ship moving through the afternoon sky. At least that was the hope. It reminded me of something I'd once seen the Darkling do, when he pulled me through a candlelit ballroom, using his power to render us nearly invisible. Yet another trick he'd mastered long before I had. Genya dug through the provisions and found a stash of Jerda, the Zemini stimulant that soldiers sometimes used on long watches. It made me feel jittery and a little nauseated, but there was no other way to keep us on our feet and focused. It had to be chewed, and soon we were all spitting the rust-colored juice over the side. If this if this stains my teeth orange, said Zoya. It will, interrupted Genya, but I promise to put your teeth back whiter than they were before. I may even fix those weird incisors of yours. There is nothing wrong with my teeth. Not at all, said Genya soothingly. You're the prettiest walrus I know. I'm just amazed you haven't sawed through your lower lip. Keep your hands off me, Taylor, Zoya grumbled, or I'll poke your other eye out. By the time dusk came, Zoya didn't have the energy to bicker. She and Nadia were entirely focused on keeping us aloft. David was able to take over the wheel for brief periods of time so Timur could see the wound on Maul's leg. Harsha, Tolia, and Maul alternated the lines to give each other a chance to stretch. Only Nadia and Zoya had no relief as they toiled beneath a crescent moon. Though we tried to find ways to help, Genya stood her back to Nadia's, bracing her so she could rest her knees and feet a bit. Now that the sun had set, we had no need for cover, so for the better part of an hour, I buttressed Zoya's arm while she sewed. This is ridiculous, she growled, her muscles shaking beneath my palms. Do you want me to let go? If you do, I'll cover you in Jerda juice. I was eager to have something to do. The ship was too quiet, and I could feel the day's nightmares waiting to crowd in on me. Misha hadn't budged from his spot curled into the hole. He was clutching the wooden practice sword that Maul had found for him. My throat tightened as I realized he brought it with him on the terrace when Bagra made him escort her to Nishovia. I fished a piece of hardtack out of the provisions and took it to him. Hungry? I asked. He shook his head. Will you try to eat something anyway? Another head shake. I sat beside him, unsure of what to say. I remembered sitting like this with Sergei in the tank room, searching for words of comfort and failing. Had he been scheming then? Manipulating me? His fear had certainly seemed real. But Misha didn't just remind me of Sergei. He was every child whose parents went to war. He was every boy and girl at Karamzin. He was Bagra begging for her father's attention. He was the Darkling learning loneliness at his mother's knee. This was what Ravka did. It made orphans. It made misery. No land, no life, just a uniform and a gun. Nikolai had believed in something better. I took a shaky breath. I had to find a way to shut down my mind. If I thought of Nikolai, I would fall apart. Or Bagra. Or the broken pieces of Sergei's body. Or Stig, left behind. Or even the Darkling. The look on his face as his mother had disappeared beneath the clouds. How could he be so cruel and still so human? The night wore on as a sleeping Ravka passed beneath us. I counted stars. I watched over Adric, I dozed. I moved among the crew, offering sips of water and tufts of dried jurda blossoms. When anyone asked about Nikolai or Bagra, I gave them the facts of the battle in the briefest possible terms. I willed my mind to silence, tried to make it a blank field, white with snow, unmarred by tracks. Sometime around sunrise, I took my place at the railing and began shifting the light to camouflage the ship. That was when Adric muttered in his sleep. Nadia's head whipped around. The pattern bobbled. Focus, snapped Zoya, but she was smiling. We all were, ready to cling to the barest scrap of hope. Let me just see really quick. Oh yeah, I got that far. We flew through the rest of the day and long into the next night. It was dawn on the second morning when we finally glimpsed the Securizoi. At midday, we spotted the deep, jagged crater that marked the abandoned copper mine where Nikolai had suggested we stash the Pattern, a murky turquoise pool at its center. The descent was slow and tricky, and as soon as the hole scraped the crater floor, both Nadia and Zoya crumpled to the deck. They had pushed the limits of their power, and through their skin was flushed and glowing. They were completely exhausted, tugging on the ropes. The rest of us managed to get the Pattern out of sight beneath a ledge of rock. Anyone who climbed down into the mine would find it easily enough, but it was hard to imagine who would bother. The crater floor was littered with rusty machinery. An unpleasant smell came from the stagnant pool, and David said the water's opaque turquoise color came from minerals leaching out of the rock. There were no signs of squatters. While Maul and Harshaw secured the sails, Toya carried Adric from the Pattern. There was blood seeping from the stump where his arm had been, but he was fairly lucid and even drank a few sips of water. Misha refused to budge from the hole. I took the blanket under his shoulders and left him with a piece of hardtack and a slice of dried apple, hoping he would eat. We helped Zoya and Nadia off the ship, dragged our bedrolls into a nest beneath the shade of the overhang, and without another word, fell into troubled sleep. We posted no watch. If we'd been followed, we had no fight left to give. As my eyes slid shut, I glimpsed Toya sneaking back onto the Pattern and forced myself to sit up again. He emerged a moment later with a tightly wrapped bundle. His gaze darted to Adric, and my stomach dropped as I realized what he was carrying. I let my weary eye close. I didn't want to know where Toya planned to bury Adric's arm. When I awoke, it was late afternoon. Most of the others were still sleeping soundly. Genya was pinning up Adric's sleeve. I found Maul coming down the road that led around the side of the crater, carrying a bag full of grouse. I thought we'd stay tonight, he said. Make a fire. We can leave for Divya Stoba in the morning. All right, I said, though I was eager to get moving. He must have sensed it because he said, Adric could use the rest. We all could. I'm afraid if we keep pushing, one of them will break. I nodded. He was right. We were all grieving and frightened and tired. I'll bring some kindling down. He touched my arm. Alina, I won't be long. I pushed past him. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want words of comfort. I wanted the fire burnt. I wanted to turn my pain into anger and bring it to the Darkling's door. I made my way up to the woods that surrounded the mine. This far south, the trees were different, taller and more sparse, their bark red and porous. I was on my way back to the mine, my arms full of the driest branches I could find, when I got the eerie feeling I was being watched. I stopped, the hair rising on the back of my neck. I peered between the sunlit trunks, waiting. The silence was dense, as if every small creature were holding its breath. Then I heard it. A soft rustling. My head jerked up, following the sound into the trees. My eyes fastened on a flicker of movement. the silent beat of a shadowy wing. Nikolai was perched in the branches of a tree, his dark gaze fastened on me. His chest was bare and lined in black as if darkness had shadowed beneath his skin. He'd lost his boots somewhere, and his bare feet gripped the bark. His toes had become black talons. He had dried blood on his hands and near his mouth. Nikolai? I whispered. He flinched back. Nikolai, Nikolai, wait! But he leapt into the air, dark wings shaking the branches as he broke through them to the blue sky beyond. I wanted to scream, so I did. I tossed my kindling to the ground, pressed my fist to my mouth, and screamed until my throat was raw. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop. I managed not to weep. On the Baturn or at the mine. But now I sank to the forest floor, my screams turning to sobs. Silent, raking gasps. They hurt, as if they might crack my ribs open, but emerged soundless from my lips. I kept thinking of Nikolai's torn trousers, and had the foolish thought that he'd be mortified to see his clothes in such a state. He'd followed us all the way from the spinning wheel. Could he tell the Darkling of our whereabouts? Would he? How much of him was left inside that tortured body? I felt it then, the vibration along that invisible tether. I pushed away from it. I would not go to the Darkling now. I wouldn't go to him ever again. But still, I knew wherever he was grieving. Maul found me there, head buried in my arms, coat covered in green needles. He offered me his hand, but I ignored it. I'm all right, I said, though nothing could have been less true. It's getting dark. You shouldn't be out here alone. I'm the Sun Summoner. It gets dark when I say it does. He crouched down in front of me and waited for me to meet his eyes. Don't shut them out, Lena. They need to grieve with you. I don't have anything to say. Then let them talk. I had no solace or encouragement to offer. I didn't want to share this hurt. I didn't want them to see how frightened I was. But I made myself get up and brush the needles from my coat. I let Maul lead me back to the mine. By the time we got all the way down to the crater floor, it was full dark, and the others had lit lanterns beneath the overhang. Took your time, didn't you? Said Zoya. Did we have to freeze while you two frolicked around in the woods? There was no point in hiding my tear-stained face, so I just said. Turned out I needed a good cry. I braced myself for an insult, but all she said was, "Next time, invite me. I could use one too." Maul dropped the kindling I'd gathered into the fire pit someone had made, and I plucked Oncat from Harshaw's shoulder. She gave a brief hiss, but I didn't care. Right now, I needed to peddle something soft and furry. They'd already cleaned and spitted the game Maul had caught, and soon, despite my sadness and worry, the smell of roasting meat had my mouth watering. We sat around the fire, eating and passing around a flask of kvass, watching the flames play over the whole of the bittern as the branches crackled and popped. We had a lot to talk about. Who would go with us into the Circozoi, and who would remain in the valley, whether or not people even wanted to stay. I rubbed my wrist. It helped to focus on the Firebird, to think of that instead of the black sheen of Nikolai's eyes, the dark crust of blood near his lips. Abruptly, Zoya said I should have known Sergei couldn't be trusted. He was always a weakling. That seemed unfair, but I let it pass. Oncat never liked him, Harshaw added. Genya fed a branch into the fire. Do you think he was planning it all along? I've been wondering that, I admitted. I thought he'd be better once we got out of the White Cathedral and the tunnels, but he almost seemed worse, more anxious. That could have been anything, said Tamor. Cave-in, militia attack, Toya snoring. Toya threw a pebble at her and said, Nikolai's men should have watched him more closely. Or I should never have let him go. Maybe my guilt over Marie had clouded my judgment. Maybe sorrow was clouding it now, and there were more betrayals to come. Did the Nishovia really did the Nishovia really just tear him apart? Asked Nadia. I glanced over at Misha. At some point, he'd climbed down from the bittern. Now he was fast asleep beside Maul, still clutching that wooden sword. It was horrible, I said softly. What about Nikolai? Zoya asked. What did the Darkling do to him? I don't know exactly. Can it be undone? I don't know that either. I looked to David. Maybe, he offered. I needed I need to study him. It's Murzost, new territory. I wish I'd most of his journals. I almost laughed at that. All the time David had been lugging those journals around, I would have gladly thrown them onto a garbage heap. But now that there was a good reason to want them, they were out of my reach, left behind at the spinning wheel. Capture Nikolai, put him in a cage, see if we could pull him from the shadow's grasp. The two clever fox finally caught. I blinked and looked away. I didn't want to cry again. Abruptly, Adric snarled. I'm glad Sergei's dead. I'm just sorry I didn't get to wring his neck myself. You need two hands for that, said Zoya. There was a brief, terrible silence. Then Idrik scowled and said, Okay, stab him. Zoya grinned and passed him the flask. Nadia just shook her head. Sometimes I forgot they were really soldiers. I didn't doubt that Adric would mourn the loss of his arm. I wasn't sure how it might impact his ability to summon, but I remembered him standing in front of me at the little palace, demanding the right to stay and fight. He was tougher than I'd ever be. I thought of Botkin, my old teacher, pushing me to run another mile, to take another punch. I remembered the words he'd spoken to me so long ago. Steel is earned. Adric had that steel, and so did Nadia. She'd proven it again in our flight from the Ubjen. A part of me had wondered what Timur saw in her, but Nadia had been in some of the worst fighting at the Little Palace. She'd lost her best friend and the life she'd always known. Yet she hadn't fallen apart like Sergei or chosen life underground like Maxim. Through all of it, she'd stayed steady. When Adric handed the flask back, Zoya took a deep drink and said, Do you know what Bagrat told me at my first lesson with her? She lowered her voice to imitate Bagrat's sturdy rasp. Pretty face. Too bad you have porridge for brains. Harsha snorted. I set fire to her hut in class. Of course you did, said Zoya. Accidentally. She refused to ever teach me again. Wouldn't even speak to me. I saw her on the grounds once, and she walked right by. Didn't say a word. Just whacked me on the knee with her stick. I still have a lump. He yanked up his trouser leg, and sure enough, there was a knob of bone visible beneath the skin. That's nothing, Nadia said, her cheeks pinking as we all turned our attention to her. I had some kind of block where I couldn't summon for a while. She put me in a room and released a hive of bees in it. What? I squeaked. It wasn't just the bees that had shocked me. I'd struggled to summon for months at the little palace, and Beggar had never mentioned that other Grisha got blocks. What did you do? Timur asked incredulously. I managed to summon a current to send them up the chimney, but I got stung so many times I looked like I had firepox. I have never been more glad I am not Grisha, Maul said with a shake of his head. Zoya lifted her flask. Let's hear for the lone Otkazatsia. Bagra hated me, David said quietly. Zoya waved dismissively. We all felt that way. No, she really hated me. She'd taught me once with the rest of the fabricators my age. She refused to ever meet with me again. I used to stay in the workshops when everyone else had her classes. Why? Harshaw asked, scratching Oncat under the chin. David shrugged. No idea. I know why, said Genya. I waited, wondering if she really did. Animal magnetism, she continued. One more minute in that hut with you, and she would have torn off all her clothes. David considered this. That seems improbable. Impossible, Maul and I said at the same time. Well, not impossible, David said, looking vaguely insulted. Genya laughed and planted a firm kiss on his mouth. I picked up a stick and gave the fire a poke, sending sparks shooting upward. I knew why Bagra had refused to teach David. He'd reminded her too much of Morozova, so obsessed with knowledge that he'd been blind to his child's suffering, to his wife's neglect. And sure enough, David had created Lumia just for fun, essentially handing the Darkling the means to enter the fold. But David wasn't like Morozova. He'd been there for Genya when she needed him. He was no warrior, but he'd still found a way to fight for her. I looked around at our strange, battered little group, at Adric with his missing arm, gazing moon-eyed at Zoya, Barsha and Toya, watching as Maul sketched our route in the dirt. I saw Genya grin, her scars pulling taut as David gestured wildly, trying to explain his idea for a brass arm to Nadia, while Nadia ignored him, running her fingers through the dark waves of Tamar's hair. None of them were easy or soft or simple. They were like me, nursing hurts and hidden wounds, all broken in different ways. We didn't quite fit together. We had edges so jagged we cut each other sometimes, but I was curled up on my side, the warmth of the fire at my back. I felt a rush of gratitude so sweet it made my throat ache. Fear came with it. Keeping them close was a luxury I would pay for. Now I had more to lose. And that's the end of chapter 12. We'll stop for right now because I don't want to lose this video. So, anywho, hope you all are enjoying the series. I will come back later tonight to continue reading it, and we'll see you all in the next video. Until then, I am the Epileptic Explorer, and I hope you all have a fantastic evening.